I seem to have gotten the reputation as a 308 Winchester hater, and many people wonder why. I tend to look at statistics and physical reality when judging the 308 Winchester against the 7mm 08 Remington against the 260 Remington. And we're going to find out what makes one better than another and why I don't think the 308 Winchester is the ultimate. You may disagree, but by the end of this program, you should have some good, hard numbers with which to compare. Hello everyone, Ron Spomer once again, trashing the 308 Winchester. Now honestly, I think by now you know that as much as I poke and dig you 308 Winchester fans, I think it is a great all-around cartridge. But I do think it's important for all of us to look at the actual physical realities of this cartridge versus some others. And by doing so, I think we discover a few important things about ballistics, which is really just a projectile, a bullet, flying through the air to do its job. The cartridges we get so excited about are really just powder reservoirs. They're holding the powder and they're holding the bullet in order to drive that bullet toward the target. But it's the bullet's shape and its mass and its velocity that does the damage, that does everything we want to happen downrange. So the case probably doesn't matter all that much. And that's what I want to cover in this episode. So let us start off with some numbers on the 308 Winchester and compare it to the other two. Now, as you can see, and you probably already know, these are all of the same basic cloth. You took the 30-06, you necked it down, shortened it down to make the 308. You took the 308 and you necked it down to make the 7mm 08, and then you necked it down even further to make the 260 Remington. So we go from a .308 inch diameter bullet to a .284 inch diameter bullet to a .264 inch diameter bullet. And we've got the same powder reservoir. Now you get a little more efficiency out of that powder dose if you're pushing a wider bullet. You've got more surface area against which those pressures can shove. So you'll get a little more efficiency, a little more velocity out of it. But there are some advantages to the narrower bullets as well, particularly sectional density and ballistics coefficient. Oh boy, here we go with all these buzzwords again. But they're important because they really do contribute a lot to what that bullet is doing for terminal performance. So let's run some fun numbers. We are going to launch these things with some pretty high BC bullets in order to give them their best chance to perform. You may, of course, get different mileage, as I often say, out of your particular load. You've got to consider your barrel length, how tight your chamber is, and a lot of other things to determine exactly how quickly your rifle will push the same bullet from the same load down the barrel. Now, the boxes I've shown you are not the same as the cartridges I'm showing you. And the bullets on these cartridges aren't the same ones we're going to talk about. Well, I'm going to talk about AccuBond long-range bullets from Nosler. And I've used the numbers that they rate their bullets at for ballistics coefficient. They may be different from that. Often they're a little bit high by the manufacturer's estimations, but we are consistent across the board here. So in the 308, we're shooting a 168 grain AccuBond long-range bullet. I think that's about optimal, or probably top end really, for being shoved to an adequate velocity by the 308 Winchester's powder capacity. In the 7mm, we're shooting the 150 grain AccuBond long range. And in the 260, we're just going to push the 142 grain AccuBond long range. Pretty much right in the same balance, I think, for each of these as far as what they are able to shove effectively. So we are going to get out of the 308 a velocity of 2,850 feet per second, and that is out of a 24-inch barrel. Took this out of the Nosler Reloading Manual number 9. The 7mm 08 is going to be going the same, 2,850 feet per second. You might get a little more or a little less out of yours. And the 260, 2,820 feet per second. Wasn't the top-end velocity for these, but I figure a lot of people are not necessarily going to get top-end. And if you're working with factory loads, don't assume you're going to get the same velocities you would with hand loads. But I think this gives us a pretty fair comparison. So what happens if we zero these for what I call my maximum point blank range for a 6-inch target? And that's around 240 to 250 yards with these. They're not exactly precisely nailed, but they're pretty close to 3 inches high at their peak trajectory. So in the 308, we're seeing at 150 yards or so, they're going to be 3 inches high, 3.04, big deal, 3 inches high. And with the 7mm, you are a 3.08, 3.09 high at 150 yards. And for the 260 at 150, we're 3.02. So I think we can all agree that that's close enough. That gives us a zero range, a maximum, or a zero range to get this maximum point blank range for 245 yards for the 308, 247 yards for the 708, and 245 yards for the 260. So once again, they're just all really close. This is going to optimize our trajectories for hunting. So what happens out at 300 yards? 4.14 inches of drop out of the 308, 3.94 from the 708, and 4.05 out of the 260. So not a lot of difference there. Who's too worried about it? Not many of us. The wind deflection, 5.76 for the 308, 5.52, a little bit better for the 708, and 4.84 for the 260. So that one's giving you a better performance on the wind deflection. We can go down these charts and we'll put them up on the screen for you. You can take your time and compare these things. But let's take it out to something extreme like 600 yards and see how these things start adding up. At 600 yards, you've got 64.7, so 64.75 of an inch drop with the 308, and 63.33, so 63.5 roughly, big deal, inch difference with the 708, but you only have 61.85 or 62 inches of drop out of the 260. So once again, the 260 is outperforming them for trajectory, but as many will say, trajectory is one thing, terminal performance is quite another. Now, since we're using the same bullet, the AccuBond long range, we can assume that we're going to get pretty much the same expansion characteristics when we hit game with these bullets. But one's going to be heavier than the other. So what is the energy going to be doing out there? At 600 yards, you retain 1,338 foot-pounds of energy out of the 308, 1,236 out of the 7mm, and the puny little 260 has 1,271. Not a heck of a lot of difference, even in the energy on those bullets way out at 600 yards. I sincerely doubt that a whitetail or a pronghorn could tell the difference. The thing with energy in bullets is it gives you an idea of the potential of that bullet to do work. It's the using that energy to do work, converting it into power and momentum that does the damage. So I think because we have similar bullet constructions here and similar impact velocities and energies, you're probably going to do just fine. So how do you decide whether the 308 Winchester is vastly superior or even a little bit superior to these other two? You can take it out to 1,000 yards, which I think is ridiculously extreme for a hunting bullet because I'm not taking any game at that distance, but some people do. Let's just run out there and look at our numbers and see what kind of a difference you get in these three cartridges. 1,000 yards, 291.92, so call it 292 inches of drop out of the 308 Winchester. 283.46, so that's 283.5 inches of drop, quite a bit less out of the 7mm 08. And that little 260 is only dropping 267.11, so call it rounded off to 267 inches. So from 267 inches of drop out of the 260 to 291 out of the 308, it's getting fairly significant. What about wind deflection? You've got 81.6 inches of deflection out of the 308, 77.4 out of the 708, and only 65.68 or 66 inches out of the 260. This 260 Remington, guys, shoots flatter and drifts less than either of the two bigger ones, and really the 308 is the worst of the bunch. What about retained energy at 1,000 yards? 726 foot-pounds in the 308, 687 in the 708, 765 in the 260. The 260 is hanging right in there. It's got more energy than the 308. Dumbfounded. The smallest one here is producing the most energy at the greatest distance. It's deflecting the least in the wind, and it's dropping the least at distance, and it's got the lightest weight bullet. What is going on? It's ballistics coefficient. It's just the efficiency of that streamlined bullet, not wasting its energy. You have to remember that when you've got the energies in these bullets, and you're trying to convert that into power or terminal performance on impact, how do you make these conversions happen? And a lot of people think, well, it's the weight of the bullet. But here we're going from a 168 grain bullet all the way down to 142 grain, and you're delivering more energy on target with the lighter bullet. So I don't know how you're going to factor that in, but if you're thinking the 308 is superior, I suggest you need to come up with some numbers to prove it. Now, a lot of guys will say, well, it's the diameter of the bullet. You're making a bigger entrance wound. You're going to do more damage because you have a larger diameter bullet. Well, maybe, but there's more energy in the lighter bullet. And if it expands to tear tissue, I don't quite understand how it can do more damage when you're going with the wider bullet. What is the difference in the widths? You're starting off with a .308 inch diameter bullet here, pretty obviously. You step down to the 7, and what are you giving up? .024 of an inch narrower diameter bullet. Do you think that's really going to make a big difference, especially once it impacts and expands? And then to the 260, well, gosh, that's a lot narrower bullet. Let's just slide it over here to look. My goodness, not only do you have a lighter weight, but you got a lot skinnier bullet. You are giving up .044 inch in bullet diameter. I don't know. It sort of looks at it when you eyeball it. It looks like, yeah, that's a smaller bullet. It can't possibly do as much damage. Once again, expansion, mushrooming, more energy. It's going to strike with more energy, so it should expand more than the 308 or the 708. So why wouldn't it do more damage? It's got more energy. It's expanding more. Well, what about sectional density? This is another one, especially the old timers you used to harp on. You've got to have a bullet with high sectional density to get deep penetration. And that's true so long as the bullet is of the same materials and construction. And in the old days, of course, it was a cup and core bullet. A lead core, a gilding metal jacket, squeeze them together to make your bullet. Obviously, the longer bullet, the heavier bullet in any given caliber, is going to have more mass behind the nose. So regardless how much nose lead is lost to erosion and breakup or excessive expansion, you have more mass behind it because that bullet has more sectional density. The cross-sectional density, if you cut that bullet in half, you measure that area, that circumference area, you're going to have more sectional density in the longer bullet because there's more mass to it. So, for deeper penetration and better performance on game, you want a higher sectional density. The sectional density of this 308 bullet at 168 grains is .253. Just a number. Use that to compare to the others' numbers. The higher the number, the higher the sectional density, and the better the potential for penetration. So we step up to that 7mm 08 bullet. Guess what? Sectional density is higher. It's .266. Now we go to that puny little 260, and the sectional density is .291, significantly higher than the 308. Once again, I just don't understand it, guys. Why are we getting so excited about the 308 being superior? Final analysis, I'm really not sure. I honestly am not sure. I have had plenty of folks say you can't use a 260 Remington on an elk, but a 308 Winchester is plenty good enough for an elk. You're probably not going to be tackling them at 500 yards with it, but inside of 300, why, it's just like a 30-06, and plenty of elk have been taken with a 30-06. Or they might say you can go to the 180 grain bullet, and that would be vastly superior. Yes, you will increase your sectional density. You will increase your ballistics coefficient, but you will significantly decrease your velocity, and that is going to pull everything back down again. So I don't think there's a free lunch with the 308, just as there isn't a free lunch with any of these other ones. But if we look at the hard data, the actual physics of what's going on with these projectiles flying through the air and trying to carry energy to the target, and then expanding and converting that energy into performance, power, penetration, expansion, and tearing tissues, I just don't quite understand why one that has the higher sectional density and the higher energy in its bullet is not going to be the equal of, if not superior to, the performance of the other two. Now, I invite everyone out there to prove me wrong. I'm scratching my head and looking through all the numbers on this stuff and trying to figure it out for myself. But it just strikes me that the math and the physics in this whole equation seems to point to that puny old 260 Remington as equal to, if not better than, the 7mm 08, which I love, or the 308 Winchester. Now, honest exposure here, I'm going to let you know that of these, I would pick the 7mm 08 as my favorite. And I think the reason is the same reason that so many picked the 308. It's simple bias. I've used the 708 and comparable cartridges, especially the 284 Winchester. I've used those to take all kinds of game around the world, where I haven't used the 260 quite as much. But again, the numbers suggest I probably should. One other thing, recoil. Not a big difference in recoil, but there is some. And for a sensitive shooter who wants to be precise and not flinch, we probably need to consider that. How much recoil in this 308 load we've been discussing? You're going to have in an 8-pound rifle 20.2 foot-pounds of recoil. Some people think that's a little excessive and they might flinch. Step down to the lighter bullet in the 708 and you're down to 17.7 foot-pounds. Not quite as much recoil. Some people are going to shoot that a little more precisely. But the 260 Remington, I'm afraid it's going to win again. There's only 15.5 foot-pounds of recoil energy in that little guy. Wow. And yet the 260 is really not that well known. It's probably even fading away because of, yeah, you guessed it, the 6.5 Creedmoor. And as much as many of us like to discredit this thing as a useless cartridge, good for nothing, kind of silly, it does essentially the same thing as that 260 Remington. I'm sorry to have to tell you this, 6.5 Creedmoor haters, but it's true. All that 6.5 Creedmoor does is throws the same bullets as the 260 Remington, but it's usually chambered in a little more accurate rifles because of the chambering and the balance in the chamber, tighter chamber and all that, and a faster twist barrel so you can more easily stabilize the longer high BC bullets. The 6.5 Swede is hanging right in there too, especially if you hand load to get the energies up a little more than the factory loads offer. But using that 6.5 by 55 Swede cartridge as kind of the benchmark, that thing was cranked out in 1892, and it went on to prove itself in Northern Europe, Sweden and Norway and Finland and all these countries on animals the size of their moose, caribou. I'm sure it was used on a lot of brown bears up there. It's got a pretty darn good reputation, and a lot of people swear by it and will use it and as an example of why the Creedmoor's kind of a new, also ran yuppie cartridge. It just doesn't matter. Yet the 6.5 Creedmoor throws the same bullets at slightly higher velocities than the standard 6.5 by 55 Swede. So why would the Swede be great and the Creedmoor be lousy and the 260 Remington be on its way out, while the 308 Winchester continues to be the top dog? Once again, it's just popularity, longevity. I think the 308 Winchester is also getting a ride because of the military, pretty obviously. It's been around as the 7.62 NATO for a long, long time. And it's just so popular, and there's so much ammunition made for it. And virtually every rifle that comes out is going to be chambered in a 308 Winchester. They might not chamber the 708 or the 260 or maybe not even the 6.5 Creedmoor. Almost everybody does, but definitely the 308. That's always the first short action cartridge that they chamber. So it's real popular, and you can get a lot of ammunition for it with a lot of bullet choices. And I can understand that. And as I said earlier at the start of this, it is a Goldilocks cartridge because it can do everything. It just can't necessarily do everything as well as or better than the 260 Remington. So write in and prove me wrong. I'm more than happy to entertain any kind of data you guys have that would support the 308 being superior to the 7mm 08 or the 260 or the 6.5 Creedmoor or any other cartridge out there that's smaller than the 308. These are all efficient short action cartridges that so many of us love to shoot these days. And I think you can't go wrong with any of them, but don't shortchange the 6.5 Creedmoor just because it's a trendy cartridge and making your funny jokes with the man buns and all the rest of it. That's a lot of fun. But seriously, this thing, just like the 260 Remington, can perform a lot better than many of us think. That's my take on this episode of Ron Spomer Outdoors. Can't wait to hear all your comments. By the way, I want to thank anyone and everyone who nominated us for and voted for us in the Gundy Awards. I wasn't even aware this was going on until I got a notice that said, you are in the top 5 of the Gundy Awards, which I understand is kind of an Oscars for gun channels on social media. I don't know if that includes television or if it's just on YouTube, but hey, it's kind of a real honor to have been nominated by folks who enjoy this channel. I didn't urge anyone to vote for me, or like I say, I didn't even know what was happening until they told me I should show up for the red carpet awards ceremony at the SHOT Show. And my wife said, "Oh, you've got to do that." And I felt embarrassed. I don't want to get up on some red carpet and pretend I'm Joe Hollywood, because I'm not. But she was right, because when we went, we saw several good folks there who have channels too, and just had a great time visiting with them for a bit. I didn't actually go to the ceremony because I had another engagement in which they were announcing a hot new cartridge that we're going to be covering soon. But Betsy went into the show for me, and she said it was really inspiring because they really emphasized Second Amendment rights, and they did a real professional job of presenting the awards. So old dog could learn some new tricks. I think if I go next year, I'm going to pay more attention and attend the whole show. But once again, I just really have to humbly accept the honor that you folks have done for me by putting me up for that Gundy Award. Really appreciate it. Hey, once again, thanks for watching, guys. Send in your comments, and we'll see you next time on Ron Spomer Outdoors. Hunt honest and shoot straight.